Well, good morning, everyone. And yeah, the title of today's sermon is "Give Thanks for Everything?" ? And I think so. Should we honestly give thanks for everything? Is the question I'm posing to all of us. As we read in St. Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians, he encourages Christians there to give thanks in all circumstances. He even raises that particular admonishment to the level of being what God's will is for them in the tradition of Jesus himself. So I remember, and I'm just kind of reflecting back on my own experiences with just understanding, I believe, being thankful. But one particular time, it takes me back to when I was 20 years old, which was just a couple of years ago. And I was visiting an area called Tierra Nueva. It means new land, just outside of Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And I was translating for a group of medical missionaries who were trying to help really the poorest of the poor in that particular city. And in this sprawling, very recent development, it looked like something from a makeshift refugee camp. I mean, you just look over these hills, this desert had been converted into housing, if you can call it that. Because what you'd see is structure after structure, stacked one after the other, no room in between. And the structures were made of cardboard mostly. Some were made of rubber tires. Others were made of just any sort of like a hodgepodge of material that could be found, scraps of plastic or corrugated metal, all stacked together along these winding, dusty roads with natural sewage ditches that had already eaten away into the sides of the roads where people's sewage had been. The stench was horrible, and there was no running water. People would have to get water from trucks that would be brought in to bring water occasionally, and people would buy or haggle for water. They'd bring their 5-gallon buckets to it and bring it back to their homes, if you could call them homes. And so it was easy to get lost in this place, and every house, it seemed, looked like the other. You know, I was very impressed with the group of these medical personnel that had come from the US to help start, do a pop-up clinic right there in the middle of this place. And this was also the place for the first time that I would meet Salva and Norma, two of the humblest, kindest people I'd ever met up until then. I was already close friends with Salva's brother, who lived in a nearby village. And so they took me into their cardboard hut with the pride of any new homeowners. They took to me immediately, it seemed, and without hesitation, they brought me in. They sat me down at their only piece of furniture, which was this cardboard table that was wobbly. And they had me sit on a milk crate, and I sat there, and they were just so happy, it seemed. And without the slightest hesitation, they began to serve me food. They brought me, they had this 50-gallon, not a 50-gallon, it was a smaller metal drum, much smaller, that had been somehow turned into some sort of stove, and where they put firewood in, and they had cooked something in a small pot, but they brought it over to me, and it was a spicy chicken broth, with some flour tortillas, and they fed it to me there, and just watched me as I ate and asked if I liked it. I was reluctant. I ate it, but reluctantly, especially when I saw they had a newborn baby in a cardboard box turned into a bassinet sitting in the corner of the room. And here I was eating probably all that they had. It surely wasn't enough for all three of us there. But They were so happy. And I asked them, I said, how long have you been here? ¿Cuánto tiempo tienen aquí? And they said, excitedly, they announced they'd been here for 5 months. And I was shocked at the cheer that I was hearing in their voices at how long they'd been there and how much they had accomplished. But I was even more shocked when I heard the next phrase that that Norma said. She said, y le damos gracias a Dios por todo que tenemos. We give thanks to God for all that we have. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I was thinking to myself, thanks for what? For poverty, for destitution, for an oppressive government, for no running water, hardly any food, no suitable shelter. But before I could even finish my own internal rant, a stream of consciousness that was going off like fireworks in my brain of why they should not be thankful. Norma, with her enormous smile that just never stopped, brought over their baby, took the baby, took her out of the cradle, the cardboard cradle, and brought her to me and said, can you pray a blessing over our baby? You know, my eyes, they welled up with tears at that moment because, my gosh, of course, they're thankful. Of course. They had everything they needed to survive that day. And they had this beautiful child too. Norma was perhaps one of the happiest people I'd ever met and have ever met. And her smile never stopped. And I prayed the best I could a blessing over their child and their family and their circumstances. And I asked God to help them more. But I don't even think they knew what I was talking about when I was asking for more, because they seemed to be so content with what they had, life together for another day. And that's all that seemed to matter. So I ask us, are we really to give thanks for everything, the good and the bad? I'm going to be honest with you today. No sophistication to this, no grand eloquence or some sort of polished answer to that. It is not political to me. I will be honest with you. I tend to think no. I find myself thinking, why should I be thankful for the evil in this world? This I cannot accept. Now, are we to be thankful in all things? Let's just change that the preposition there. In all things rather than for all things? Well, this I can make sense of. Yes. Because even if we read in Scripture much more about that idea, it becomes very, very pronounced. I mean, in Colossians 3, we read that whatever we do, we should do it in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God in Christ, right? In Philippians chapter 4, it says, do not be anxious for anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Remember Psalm 100? Enter God's gates with thanksgiving in your heart. Enter those courts with praise. Ephesians 5 tells us, give thanks always. We can go back to 1 Chronicles 16, and it says, now we thank you, O God. Psalm 69 says, I will magnify the Lord with thanksgiving. So there is, I believe, little question that embracing an attitude of gratitude is God's way. If we are to live in harmony as creation with Creator, in fact, I would surmise that gratitude is a necessary component. So yes, to be thankful in all things rather than for all things, maybe. You may not all be aware, but the Thanksgiving holiday, because of its direct tie to the mythology of the original Thanksgiving story that many of us learned as children, it has become quite controversial for some. And that includes me, like I think many native peoples of this continent. For most native tribes, it is now considered a day of mourning rather than a day of thanksgiving. But why, many of us might ask? Isn't it good to be thankful? It is simple, really, perhaps too simple as to why there's been a transition in that day specifically. The story we had all been taught, that of the original colonists at Plymouth Rock needing help to survive the winter, it depended heavily on the local tribes for assistance. And we know that to be factual, and which they did. In fact, and a feast did occur, we believe, and most certainly food was shared among all. And it was apparently many more native people at that particular feast than there were new settlers, Europeans. But however, it is the series of events that follow this particular time, this particular event, which has set in emotion, which is set in motion and emotion, but motion, that oppressive zeal for subjugation, terror, and eventual genocide of many indigenous peoples of this land. That's tainted that story, because that is the truth and the reality and the consequences and the product of what has happened. And certain people feel that it is ignored in the mythology created around the history of the day. And though it started with the natives assisting the settlers, the pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, it ended, of course, with the indigenous people's ultimate destruction in many, many ways. Now, many, not many, but some have survived, but many have been lost. And then even survival is a tenuous description at best. So yeah, there is controversy around that day, but more importantly, it's the symbolism of that story being used to cajole Americans into taking time to count their blessings and give thanks to God for all those blessings in the spirit of the original pilgrims breaking bread with the native tribes. That seems to be where the controversy lies, because the story itself is flawed and co-opted a bit. It's used as a unity story, but for native peoples, it's a false unity. So many natives have begun to reject it altogether. Not all, though. There are many that still celebrate it, even in Oklahoma, where I'm from. But I myself have become particularly burdened with it personally as a moral conflict in more recent years, especially when it comes to the mythology of the story, and I'm very careful about it. And that is why our interfaith clergy group has decided to heed our collective conscience about it, and to change what has historically been called our Thanksgiving, interfaith Thanksgiving service that we have every Thanksgiving Day. We've had it since 1969, I believe. We've changed it now to be called the Interfaith Service of Unity and Reflection, in order to honor our unity together, but unity that is both in grief and in thanksgiving. We grieve with loss and the sins of our nation that we call our home. And at the same time, we are thankful, like Salva and Norma, when we are simply happy to be alive another day together. And then the question, I guess, becomes for many of us is, can you articulate for yourself your personal Thanksgiving? Because that's what really matters. So when we look at Thanksgiving, it's not about that story of breaking bread with native peoples. It is about us being thankful, period. The question becomes, what are you thankful for? So I encourage you to take a moment and contemplate that question. What am I thankful for? I encourage you to name your truth, your answer. Name what it is you are thankful for. If you'd like to place it into the chat box here on the Zoom, please feel free to do it there. If you'd like to say it aloud here, I'll give you just a moment or I'll give you some space for that in just a moment. But I do encourage you to think about how to articulate what you are thankful for. Now, if you'd like to say it quietly, silently, where you are, then do that. I just ask you to speak your truth to yourself. Speak your gratitude. Take your baby from the cardboard box in the corner of the room and be thankful for what you have and that you have another day to experience this life together.